Well, PBD just went all out on Ben Shapiro. The Daily Wire has planted itself as a divide in right-wing media, and I think the clip you're about to watch is part of a backlash that Ben Shapiro should always have expected after the firing of Candace Owens. And if you're wondering why Patrick Bet-David was dragged into this fight, there's some finer details I need to tell you after you take a look at this.
When all of a sudden you started hearing about, hey, Christ is king, Ben Shapiro in the small setting said what he said about, what she said is not a travesty, but a disgrace or something. He used some words like that about Candace in a smaller setting. Very obvious. You can't touch the Jewish community, you can't talk about it. And that cost the person the job. Great. That's when I made the comments when I said the Daily Jewish Wire or the Daily Israeli Wire, I don't know if that's what you're asking about. I publicly said that multiple times. I'm not, apologizing or changing my position. That's my position, what I said. That's where we know what Ben's ultimate is, okay? To me, I'm America first. I live in America. This is my number one priority. I'm raising my kids here. I'm from Iran, I'm Armenian, and I'm Assyrian. But if you tell me what country matters the most, America matters the most.
Honestly, even Ben Shapiro himself would probably speak in the same tone if you asked him, and that's despite the fact that he is certainly not an isolationist conservative along the lines of someone like Matt Walsh or Candace Owens. Frankly, in much of the Republican Party, it's true that a vast majority, at least 2/3, according to Gallup poll, can be classified as hawks for their views on foreign policy. But Ben Shapiro is a curious case in himself because it's easy to trace those interventionist views on foreign policy until you land at a contradiction over something like economic policy or taxation. For example, tell me how you can square the idea that the United States needs to be proactive in funding the conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, while having a minimalist view on taxation as something that would be considered theft if it didn't equally compensate the citizen that is taxed in some other way.
My own position on Ukraine has been that the United States should continue to supply Ukraine with the support necessary in order to preserve its government and to preserve its territory. And meanwhile, there need to be serious talks about what exactly an off-ramp looks like in Ukraine, because virtually no one has spelled out exactly what that looks like. And virtually no one believes at this point that Ukraine is going to be able to completely take back both the Donbass and the Crimea region.
Thank God I have the ability to pay those taxes. But by the same token, is that a taking from me by the government? There's no question it's a taking from me by the government. So no, all taxation is not theft, but it is theft when the government takes money from you with no intent to provide you the benefits of the tax dollars that you have just been separated from.
That's where Candace Owens perhaps starts to sound more coherent, even if you don't think she's right over her purely isolationist view on foreign policy, and that's the camp that someone like Patrick Bet-David is part of. Here's what he wrote earlier this year criticizing the so-called foreign aid bill. And I quote, "Another day of Congress not giving a crap about the border. Unfortunately, Speaker Johnson showed zero backbone to the establishment. America first has been my position with the goal to unify common values of those living in America." When you realize that it lines up with perhaps the 1/3 of the Republican base that is much more isolationist on foreign policy, you start to see why he would be critical of Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. And that's a microcosm of both the Daily Wire and Valuetainment competing for greater relevance in the online conservative media space over the divisive wedge issue of the two current major wars. In light of that, does Ben Shapiro defense of the Daily Wire being a publisher and not a platform actually hold water? Patrick Bet-David had an interesting response to this.
I think, from the Daily Wire's perspective, this is a misalignment with the core values of their organization, right? In the same way that being pro-trans or pro-abortion might be. That's their argument.
That's your opinion, or you're not? Because you said
that is my recollection of the conversation we had with Andrew.
Because when I say I think, that's kind of my opinion. So then I can rebuttal to your opinion on what you're saying instead of his. But listen, to be fair to Ben came out and said, we're a publisher. We're not a platform.
Right.
He's 100% right.
Yeah.
Of course you're a publisher. He said, we don't have to keep people here if we don't want to. Totally get it. But that position isn't necessarily an anti-conservative position. One would never say Candace is not conservative.
Yeah.
Candace is a conservative.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't think anyone's arguing that Ben Shapiro or Jeremy Boring didn't have the right to fire anyone they want, but every action is going to reverberate with the conservative base and tell them exactly what topics are off limits. It's no secret that with the rise of online media, publications that explicitly cover news from a particular political worldview have become more common than news organizations that claim to be impartial and objective. But even if the Daily Wire is one of the biggest names in conservative media having a particular opinion on foreign wars, and Nations is not part of it. That's why the comparison made with something like the gender debate does not make sense. Being in support of trans ideas or being pro-abortion would likely make you fall out of favor with the conservative base and audience, but criticizing a foreign government over its handling of a war does not, and that's why that argument has never really held water. But Patrick Bet-David seems to have realized that for a segment for the conservative base that still listens to the Daily Wire having a particular stance over the current conflict in the Middle East, has made it to that inner core of conservative interventionist ideology.
Look, Ben has made it clear. One topic, but the market's never known this, that you can't question that. It's not like it's in the bylaws. If you work here, you can't make a comment about Israel or questioning Netanyahu or any of this stuff.
I don't think that's what it was. Because Matt Walsh is still there, right?
But I get that, but Matt Walsh didn't question it at the levels that she did. Matt Walsh didn't go out there and say, going against Shmuley and some of these other guys, having the debate that she was having and calling them out. And she was probably a little bit more vocal and antagonistic, but that's her style. This isn't a shot at Daily Wire or Ben Shapiro. This is just since October 7th and even COVID, everybody's exposed walking around naked today. Everybody is naked today, okay? Okay, we know where you stand. 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 Cool. Now at least we know where everybody stands. And we get to pivot and adjust.
It was always going to be this way. Every action has a cost and a consequence, and there's no doubt that while the Daily Wire may have gained and solidified support from one fraction of the conservative audience, it has also lost favor with another. And it's clear from people spamming negative reviews for the company and Ben Shapiro's show on Trustpilot and IMDb. Patrick Bet-David tried at first to bring both Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens together for a conversation, but that clearly couldn't happen when Ben said Candace wanted to, quote, hide behind a moderator before slamming Patrick Bet-David for his criticism of his company.
I wanted to have him on to do a couple debates. Ben doesn't come down to want to do debates, but I'd like to have these types of conversations to see what it takes place. I know he said no to Candace's request because Candace's initial request was me moderating a debate with the two, and he says, why would I do that after he called us a Daily Jewish Wire and Daily Israeli Wire? By the way, good point. Go pick somebody else. But I wanted to see the debate. Now we're being told by Greenwald or whoever it was that came out saying the fact that they used that as a way to put a gag order on Candace. If any of that stuff comes out that's true, that's very deceptive and manipulative to use Twitter to get her to respond to book a debate and then to say later on that's a gag order. If it's true.
Unfortunately, that debate couldn't happen and may never happen. As it stands right now, the Daily Wire has found itself at the center of a controversy for the last 6 months that just isn't cooling down, especially as Candace is back with her podcast spilling even more beans about her ouster from the Daily Wire. But in all the chaos, the vast conservative audience is watching closely, and they will be the ultimate arbiters of who they think better represents their ideology and desires for the country. Tell me in the comments below if you've changed your perception of the Daily Wire after this controversy, but what we can do right now is put enough faith in the audience that in the marketplace of ideas, they'll gravitate to the most rational and moderate people that best represent what they stand for.